Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Manifesting Lab webinar, chosen by you, specially selected by you, on the subject of vibrational health. A remarkable subject. Well, let's see if I can do it justice, at least, to make it a remarkable subject. Here's what you're going to learn today. You're going to learn, first of all, how to let your body take care of itself, and how to write sentences without the word to. You're also going to learn how to eat whatever you want. But I hear you cry, I can eat whatever I want anyway. I just pick it up and put it in my mouth. Okay, so there's a few conditions to that. Eat whatever you want and stay at or reduce to your ideal body weight, which I think is an issue for some people. Also, be energized after meals instead of lethargic. And keep healthy. And lots more. Literally, I could not even begin to make that slide. I don't know how much I can cram into this webinar. I'm going to do my best without overcomplicating it. But we'll see how it goes. But before we begin, apparently there are authorities in society that get upset if you tell people what to do with their bodies. Because naturally, you're too dumb to make your own decisions about your own body. So I am obliged to tell you, for the sheer value, or rather for the sake of not having those authorities coming and telling me I've been naughty, I am obliged to tell you that I am not a medical doctor. This webinar should not be treated as medical advice. In fact, it should be treated as entertainment only. I am merely an entertainer. And shame on you if you watch this webinar any further, because it is entertainment, not to be taken seriously in any way whatsoever, and you're better off watching reality TV and browsing Facebook. Because if you do follow any advice that I give you here, I am not responsible for anything that happens to you. And if you carry on watching now, after me having said all of that, it's entirely your fault, and you should seek professional and medical psychological help as soon as possible. So I hope that's clear. Now then, now that I'm talking to myself on this webinar, and there's no one else left, let me offer my disclaimer. So my disclaimer is that this is an impossible webinar, a bit like the Dealing with Overwhelm webinar, which was another impossible webinar, because this area of health is so massive and so complex that I can only scratch the surface of what is basically a $1 trillion industry. And we all know $1 trillion is less than a gazillion dollars, but it's pretty big. So there's an entire world industry based around health, and it has got enormous complexity behind it. And you, because of your interest in this webinar, obviously have some interest in it also. So there's no way I can possibly cover every single subject you want to have covered. So what I've had to do is be very selective and pick and choose what would have the most practical impact for you. So I'm going to try and present ideas that will make you think. And from a new place of thinking, those thoughts should attract into your life differently to what you're currently getting. And so perhaps those thoughts will then attract new approaches and methods for your own particular health-related situation. Now, I've kind of decided to give you some very practical stuff as well, which you'll see. And hopefully by the time this webinar is over, you will be looking at some things in a very different way. So, having given you my disclaimer, let us get started on this journey into vibrational health. Now, as those of you who have been at these webinars before or have watched them, which I presume is everybody, I hope, this is the way we go around the slides, and then we kind of go around the slides that way. So this is a map of the webinar to come. And let's get going with it. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the idea of the intelligent machine. So first of all, I wish to congratulate you. Congratulations! Well, what I'd like you to do, just for a moment, just bear with me. Assume you are the owner of a human body. You've just been handed over the keys to it. And a bit like you've just been handed over the keys to a car. So in other words, you've just been born. Now at that moment, when you're handed the keys to the human body that you've got, what's missing? Would anyone like to have a guess? So you've just been given a human body. You've handed over the keys by whatever thing you think hands over keys to a human body, and you're like a car driver. You're driving this human body around. Well, what's missing from this this scenario? Somebody's got it straight away. I'm not gonna give you the answer just yet. Well, you guys are on form today. Let's just see if there's any other answers that come in that are wrong, so I can mock them. But unfortunately, so someone's come up with an interesting answer: the ability to actually drive. Yeah, actually, that's probably pretty much the answer. I'm not going to give any names here, by the way, during this webinar, so you can embarrass yourself as much as you want. So someone's saying you won't have any beliefs or habits. Well, that is a really interesting statement, because certainly it's unlikely you would have habits. I was going to say unlikely you would have habits, conscious habits, but beliefs. You would have a belief, for example, in gravity. You would have a belief in the fact that you inhabit a human body. So possibly there are beliefs at a deeper level, but I know what you're getting at there. That's an interesting answer. Okay, so I'm going to put you out of your misery because there's too many clever people on the webinar today. Yes, what you're missing when you are born are the instructions. And that's the problem. That's the problem with the entire health industry, with everything to do with health. No one's got instructions for the human body. Everything we really know about the human body, it's educated guesses. And some people's guesses are better than others. But just browsing around the internet and looking at the subject of health, there are so many guesses that really contradict each other. So the question then becomes, after you're born and then you start to use this intelligent machine, as I said earlier, you're kind of a bit lost. Now, there are certain components of the human body that kind of imply the instructions to use them. And later in this webinar, we'll look more closely at those and we'll see how the design of the body itself tells you how to use it. But for now, let's just look at some ideas about some other people's ideas for the operating instructions for the body, rather than give you mine. So there is a large community that does have some best guesses, some educated guesses about how the body works, and that particular community tends to have the belief system that the human body is a dumb machine. Now, I'm speaking very broadly and generally here, but the community I'm talking about is the community of modern medical science. Medical science in its purest form treats the body as a machine, and it treats the body as separate bits. You only have to walk into a hospital and you see all the different sections of the hospital are to do with different aspects of the body. So you might have an eye section of the hospital, you might have ear sections, I guess, and I don't know hospitals that well, but there's different sections for each part of the human body. So we treat it as a machine that's made up of different components, and when one of those components breaks or wears out, we fix a bit here, and we fix the other bit there, and then we kind of, in that medical science kind of mindset, you don't question why the body behaves as it does. You just treat it as something that you operate, and sometimes these things go wrong and you fix them. Now, with that mindset comes this idea that, for example, diseases and illnesses pop out of nowhere. So in the same way that the body might maybe suddenly some part of your body stops working. So let's say your heart has some problems. There's no real investigation as to why that's happened. Yes, there will be a sort of physical medical reason, but the why is kind of left alone. And because the why is left alone, then modern medical science doesn't ask, why do we get diseases or illnesses? It just deals with them when they appear, and they're treated as though they just happen. Now, this is not a criticism of medical science, because we manifested medical science in response to previous generations that didn't have medical science. But just because you've manifested something doesn't mean that it can be used always in a way that benefits you. I mean, we have manifested the internet. And right now, we may be using it in an empowering way, this particular community, I hope. But you can use it in disempowering ways. The internet is just the internet. Similarly, medical science is just medical science. It can be used in disempowering ways to make us feel helpless and fragile, or it can be used in a more complementary way, alongside ideas that, for example, we talk about in the manifesting lab. So it's not that medical science has anything wrong with it. It's just something that's manifested, and we're free to use it as we wish. But one of the things that I think is overrated in medical science is that we tend to give all our power away to it. Without the idea of the medical system, the health systems in many countries, we feel fragile and helpless. We tend to put medical people on pedestals if we don't have a medical background. But if medical science is so powerful and so unbelievably dominant, then why do we need to do things like this? If you break your arm, you put it in a sling. Well, why? Well, it's because the body, when you don't move that arm for a while, can heal itself. Medical science doesn't do that healing. It just creates the conditions where the healing can occur. So this dumb machine idea, it might be a dumb machine to some extent, but it's still doing stuff that isn't that dumb. You see, this idea that we have fragile bodies, that somehow health is a thing that is uncertain, I have an issue with that. If our human bodies are that fragile, then how do they cope with these sorts of things? How do they cope with living in modern society, and yet at the same time cope with, for example, living in some jungle somewhere, and then at the same time cope with living in some extremely cold place? All of those different scenarios will have different ways of living attached to them, completely different ways of living. And yet one design of the human body copes with all of them. And not only that, I mean, there are multitudes of different environments, multitudes of different ways of living, and human bodies survive just fine. It's just pretty impressive for a dumb machine. But even more than that, if the human body is so fragile, if health is such an unusual thing, well, how did we ever survive before? Because even modern medical science is really, I would say, not more than, say, 150 years old, maybe a lot less. So how did we ever get here from being cave dwellers? Assuming you believe we came from sort of cave people. I mean, were there cave hospitals and cave pharmacies when people hurt themselves? Was there a cave cafe? A cave health food store? Seems a bit doubtful. The thing is, bodies have been maintaining themselves for thousands of years before medical science. People have been healthy. People have thrived. How do I know they've thrived? Because you're here. We haven't been wiped out by anything. The human race continues to evolve, continues to grow. If health is so fragile, if our bodies are so in need of constant maintenance from the health system, there's no way we could have come this far. So our mere existence proves that there's something more going on. We're not dumb machines. There's something more that when you step back and look at it, you start to appreciate that there's something very powerful going on. If you think about your heart, for example, that's fine. You know, it could be a dumb machine just pumping away there. But then when you sleep, who's controlling the heart rate then? And when you're exercising, who's controlling the heart rate then? I don't think it's your doctor or your medical prescription. There seems to be something else going on. And who's controlling your breathing, your lungs? When you go out for a run, do you have to set them to a certain level to provide enough oxygen for you? No, of course you don't. It just takes care of itself. This dumb machine has some pretty impressive programming going on. And then you cut your finger, for example. I mean, you literally can just cut your finger in front of you, assuming you like doing that kind of thing, watch the blood come out, and you can literally, in a few minutes, start to see it heal itself. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And as I said in the Living Forever webinar, the entire body really rebuilds itself every few years. That's pretty good for a dumb machine. Or perhaps the machine is not that dumb. Perhaps we don't trust the body as much as our ancestors did. We've just started to evolve beliefs that we're weaker, we're more fragile than we really are. But when you start to think of the intelligence, the absolutely staggering stuff that goes on just to make your blood circulate, just to be able to move a limb, the incredible intelligence that must be going on below the surface, and you take a step back and you look at it, you start to realize there is nothing dumb about the human body. It's the opposite. It's a powerful, self-repairing system that can pretty much cope with anything you throw at it. And let me suggest to you that health and vitality is not unusual for the human body. It's natural. Everybody has access to it. And let me suggest to you that the only reason you don't have that health and vitality is not because you haven't fixed the body in a certain way to give it to you. It's because you've got in the way of that powerful intelligence and stopped it doing what it would naturally do, which is to give you that health and vitality. So what I'm suggesting is that we generally in today's society get in the way. And that's why we have these illnesses, these diseases. That's why random stuff seems to happen to our health. It's not because we are fragile. It's because we've just been doing the wrong job.